So, hi everybody, this is Hustle Hub. I'm Giacomo, and today we are with a special guest. He is Cameron Galbraith. He has his own channel, and he talks about the best tips for his college life, and he also talks about some of the best experiences he had. He had experiences in finance, so maybe you can tell us more about it, why you decided to start a YouTube channel and what motivated you to get into finance.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Cameron Galbraith. Like you said, I have a YouTube channel. I'm right about 6.6K subscribers, so that's been a lot of fun over the last few years. I'm going into my senior year at the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida, so over here in the United States, if you have any international viewers. But yeah, I've been really interested in finance. I've majored in finance, so I've had some internships in asset management with a hedge fund, and then this last summer with Regions Bank, so within the banking industry. So that's given me a lot of insight into kind of two different areas within the financial industry. But yeah, on my YouTube channel, I just document a lot of my college life, so how I study for exams, things like that, and then also that's kind of translated into how I got my internships and my experience with those internships, and trying to do my best to help others get some awesome internships as well. So I'm looking forward to kind of sharing a little bit more of that value with everyone here today.
Okay. So you worked a lot in order to get some good internships. Can you tell us a bit more how you started and how you improved in your research, and what are the best tips to stand out in an internship selection process, or even in a working selection process?
Yeah, of course. So, like I said, I go to the University of Florida, which is definitely an awesome school. It's very well ranked, but by no means is it Harvard or Penn or even Michigan when it comes to public schools. So, that does present some challenges when applying for, a investment banking internship with Goldman Sachs. You're not coming from a target school. So it's really important that you're able to kind of differentiate yourself and really stand out when maybe your school isn't the absolute best. But as far as myself getting my internships, after my sophomore year, that is when I got my internship with the hedge fund. That was just a local firm here in Naples, Florida. That was when the COVID pandemic was at its peak. Everyone was sent home from school. So I spent a lot of time there once I was home, just applying, cold emailing a lot of different firms in town. Honestly, what I would do, and what I recommend a lot of people do, is just look up wherever your city is and just private equity, or whatever your city is, hedge funds. And that's kind of how I got in contact with a lot of different people within those industries in my town. And through there, they kind of, maybe they had an internship program, maybe they didn't, but they knew someone who did. And through that, they were just kind of able to point me in the right direction. And through those sources, that's actually how I ended up getting the internship that I had. And the portfolio manager actually went to Wharton. So definitely a very smart guy, and I learned so much from him, and I can talk about that more later. But my internship I had this last summer was definitely a more structured internship as far as the application process goes. You had to go through the hire review, virtual interview, and then of course the Zoom interviews. So that was really important. That taught me a lot about being able to differentiate myself, not only on my resume, but also when communicating with someone. So kind of the biggest tips for that, and what I preached a lot in my YouTube videos, is having a lot of extracurricular activities. So at the end of the day, your school matters, but what you do outside of school and your networking matters more. So for me at UF, I really try to be involved. I'm in student government. I'm in a lot of student organizations. And through that, that's given me a lot of experiences that can kind of translate into, a job in finance. And then also, like I said, a lot of the time, networking is the biggest thing. Whatever school you go to, however small you think it is, chances are you still have someone who went to your school at some point working for the company you want to work for. So definitely make sure to network with that person. It's pretty easy to connect with them on LinkedIn, send a quick chat asking them to have a 5-minute phone call, and just through that, it's really helpful. So those are just some quick tips for people who maybe don't come from Harvard or Penn, but still kind of want to get one of those top internships. It's really important to focus on your extracurriculars, and then also do a lot of networking.
Okay. So there's a chance that a lot of people with similar backgrounds as yours try to compete for the same positions. What do you think that stood out the most that made them want to select you rather than others?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, that's a good question, and something I probably need to think about a little bit more, just because whenever I would be offered a position, I'd just be so grateful to have had that. But I think for myself, honestly, my experience on YouTube helped me a lot with kind of being able to talk to the camera, just because this last recruiting cycle, everything was remote, so everything was through Zoom or Teams, whatever it may be. So that kind of gave me a little bit more experience. I've been talking to people on a camera for years now on YouTube. So I felt a little bit more comfortable in that environment. And also just in general, I kind of pride myself on my abilities to socialize with people, have a good relationship with them, not be, still be able to talk about the technicals of things, but still have a friendly, fun conversation as well. So I think at the end of the day, in all these interviews, both sides want it to go well. So it's not like you have to be super intimidated thinking that the other person is trying to get you, maybe ask you a really tough question. Maybe they will, but at the end of the day, they also want the interview to go well. They don't want it to be awkward. So I really just embrace that and try to have as much fun in my conversations and really leave each conversation, feeling like I actually made, a connection with the person I'm talking to. And, if the other person in the interview feels like it was a normal, friendly, fun conversation, most likely they'll think a lot higher of you and then, promote you higher on in the application process. So I think for myself, my ability to talk to others and really be able to socialize. And then also, of course, my extracurriculars, I wouldn't mention my YouTube too often, just because a lot of people still don't understand that you can make money off of YouTube. When they think of YouTube, they probably think of Jake Paul, Logan Paul, that whole world of it. So I don't mention it too often, but just within school, like I said before, I'm super involved, and that's given me a lot of opportunities to talk about in those interviews.
Okay. So you talked about extracurriculars. Do you do something else aside from the YouTube um, stuff you do, or is it just YouTube? And what do you think are the best extracurriculars outside of YouTube for students?
Yeah. So, I mean, outside of YouTube, there are so many organizations that are offered through your schools. So I talked about this in one of my recent videos, but a lot of schools offer like an investment fund. So that kind of mimics, maybe a hedge fund. So you join it, and then you're a research analyst for your school. And through there, I mean, usually at the University of Florida, I'm not involved in the actual one we have, but I have a lot of friends who are, and it's really cool. So the actual University of Florida endowment gives the program about $500,000 to invest. So throughout the years, they've been able to invest that. They're able to, do research on stocks they think will go up. So it's a really cool environment just because it is, somewhat like a real world experience. So these are very helpful for investment banking, asset management, just because it shows that you actually have some experience in the financial industry, even though maybe you didn't have an internship. So I definitely recommend applying for those if they offer them at your school. You're definitely very, tough to get into, but because of that, that just makes it even better. But outside of that, I think just any student organization on campus will really be helpful, not only because it will most likely, maybe teach you some technical skills or some soft skills, but it'll also give you a much wider network of people to talk to, at your school, people who are older than you, maybe have gone through the process of applying for internships. And, chances are now they're working at some of those companies you want to work for. So they can just give you a lot of information. So that's been really helpful for me at UF. It's a big school, and so we've had students go to pretty much every company. So I have a lot of contacts at pretty much anywhere I'd want to work in the financial industry.
Okay. So you talked about, for example, this university fund. Is it something that university puts you gives you connections with people already in the industry so that you can improve your skills with a person that is already a pro, so you can improve faster? Is it something that you have to figure out all by yourself, or you are backed by the university and all the people that the university is connected to?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a lot of times in these organizations, they have a pretty strict training, training schedule. So this just kind of allows people who maybe just got initiated into the organization some time to learn. Just because, like I said, they are working with real money. So, they definitely don't want to just let some random sophomore student have access to $50,000 and do what they want. So there is a lot of training that goes into it. A lot of the times it is just kind of older students in the organization. But these students usually have had internships in investment banking, asset management, wealth management, things like that. So they're learning from, the top students. And, like I said, then the network, because these programs are so selective to get into, these students then usually end up getting the better internships, the better jobs, and then they do become the professionals, the CFAs, whatever it may be. So it really just then creates this awesome network of people kind of exactly in the industry that you'd want to be in.
Okay. So you had two very important experiences in the industry, one in a large firm and one in a smaller firm. Can you tell us the pros and cons of being in a large firm and the pros and cons of being in a smaller firm?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. So after my sophomore year of college is when I worked for the hedge fund, and this was definitely a much smaller firm. So like I said, it was located here in Naples, Florida, which is by no means a big city. But there are a lot of wealthy retired people here, and that's why the hedge fund has been so successful. But that was definitely a much smaller firm, and that does offer a lot of pros and cons. So the biggest pro is that it allowed me to have a lot of conversation and contact with the portfolio manager. So like I said before, this is an extremely smart guy who went to Wharton, knew so much, and just spent a lot of time teaching me the fundamentals and the strategy behind the actual fund. And I thought that was extremely important. More so kind of understanding the concepts behind the fund instead of just the technicals. And I think a lot of the times people get caught up in the technical aspect of it, but at the end of the day, being able to understand how money works and what your strategy is at a conceptual level is extremely important. So that was the biggest thing, just being able to go to his office, have conversations with him, and really just pick his brain was extremely helpful. And that is kind of one of the things you only get in a smaller firm. If it was a bigger company or hedge fund, that just wouldn't necessarily be possible if it were as much of a hierarchy and I had to go through 6 different bosses before I got to him. So it was extremely helpful to be in that situation. Also, with the smaller firms, they don't always have structured internship programs. So this could be kind of a pro and a con. So for myself, I was actually the first intern they ever had. So again, that's a pro or a con. But because I got that internship through cold emailing, the guy was feeling generous and he was like, you know what, let's take an intern on, let's do it. And I feel like at a bigger firm, maybe they'd have a structured internship, but if not, there's too much red tape and corporate things they'd have to go through to actually get a program in place. And so I'm very grateful for that experience with the smaller firm. But like I said, it was a lot of learning and it wasn't super structured. So that's probably the more benefit of the larger firm. So this last summer, I worked for Regions Bank, which has about 20,000 employees throughout the US. And so that's definitely a bigger company than the previous one. And through that, again, there's a lot of pros and cons, probably the con being, there's a lot of red tape and hierarchy to everything that you're doing, which, can be good and bad. But I think the pro of it all is that this means that everything is a lot more structured. So because they've had internships in the past, they kind of know, the onboarding process and exactly how to handle interns. There's a lot more HR events. So this is something that a lot of people could talk about. They're good and bad. Sometimes they're just things you have to sit through. But that was just kind of something I enjoyed. Also, with bigger firms, there's most likely going to be other interns. So it's really nice to kind of get to meet some more people your own age with similar interests. So overall, there's a lot of pros and cons between small and large firms, but you kind of just got to experience them for yourself. And, it's more so finding the place that works best for you.
So, okay, very interesting. So there's a lot of debate whether hedge funds are actually worth it and worth the fees that they charge. What do you think people that invested in the hedge fund didn't find in a, let's say, in a passive investment instrument? So what was the advantage of investing in such a hedge fund?
Yeah, so the hedge fund that I worked for was it really focused on distressed equities. So instead of explaining it way in complex details, they really looked for companies that had gone through some pretty tough quarters, and because of that, their stock had declined, let's say 60%. So that was a pretty strict cutoff that they were always looking for. But it was really important that they would find companies that, the reason for their downfall wasn't necessarily their own fault. It was for, obviously this last year was different because of COVID, everyone went down. But it was usually for reasons kind of outside of their control. So let's say if it was, some company in California, the California wildfires would obviously be pretty detrimental to their company. The company might still have a good business, but they've just been affected by other things and their stock price is taking a tumble. So the hedge fund would really invest, do a ton of research into these companies, find out which ones are the winners, pick them. And I think as far as the difference between going with a hedge fund and going with just a passive investment like, an S&P 500 index fund, is that with the hedge funds, you just know that whoever it is running the hedge fund has a pretty strict strategy. And at the end of the day, that's just not what you're going to be getting anywhere else. So when you're investing in a hedge fund, you really have to believe in the portfolio managers, because these are the people doing all the research, executing all the trades, really understanding kind of where they're coming from is the biggest part. But realistically, I feel like a lot of people who invest in hedge funds are kind of doing it because it gives you some clout. It's kind of cool to say, oh, I'm invested in the hedge fund. All these people are extremely high net worth individuals. So, maybe they're not, it's not like their entire net worth is committed to this hedge fund. I'm sure they have plenty of money in the index funds. So they're just trying to diversify, but it's also probably just cool to tell their friends, I'm invested with this hedge fund, make it a competition of sorts. But, I think when I was with them in the summer of 2020, it was a really interesting time just because we had seen all stocks pretty much fall dramatically because of COVID. And then everyone started to shoot back up. So even if you were invested in an index fund, you might have lost a little bit of money at the beginning, but in the end, you ended up, pretty big. And a lot of hedge funds during this time were struggling. And you kind of mentioned, is even investing in a hedge fund worth it? And I think that's a really good question, just because, if you look at the returns over the years, the stock market averages 10% a year. So it's pretty hard to, consistently beat that. So as far as the advantages of it, I think that's more something you need to worry about if you've got $50 million lying around and you're looking to invest. But I think when making that decision, it's really important to kind of weigh the pros and cons of the actual portfolio manager and really be able to understand the strategy that they're going with, because at the end of the day, that's what makes all the difference.
Okay. So for those who don't know, what are the requirements for investing in a hedge fund? So you need to be very wealthy in order to access the hedge fund world, and how does that work?
Yeah, so I don't have all the details. I kind of included this in one of the videos I made on my channel, but I think, like you said, to be an investor in a hedge fund, you actually have to be an accredited investor, which means that there's actually an approval process you have to go through in order to become this. It's similar for a lot of angel investing, venture capital, things like that. So I think the biggest thing is that you have $1 million worth of investable assets. So this is cash, equities, bonds. So it's kind of your net worth minus your home loans and your property. So you have to have at least $1 million of liquid assets that you're able to invest. So obviously, that takes care of a good percentage of the population right there is cut out. But that's really the biggest thing as far as being able to invest in a hedge fund. And a lot of the times the hedge funds are selective. The biggest hedge funds in the world, every billionaire would want to be investing in them, but the hedge fund doesn't necessarily take their funds. So it's really important that you have plenty of money. But at the end of the day, it comes down to who you know and the connections you have. And that's kind of going to be the end all be all for if you're able to invest in a hedge fund.
Okay. So I was just wondering, do even smaller hedge funds have tools like the Bloomberg Terminal and all the different data sources, or they use cheaper data sources because the terminal, of course, is quite expensive?
Yeah, so the terminal is expensive, but I can tell you, the hedge funds aren't necessarily hurting for cash. If it's a successful hedge fund, they're making plenty of money. They're not worried about the expense of a Bloomberg terminal. So even for the hedge fund I was working for, which certainly isn't, a large hedge fund by numbers, they still did have a Bloomberg terminal. So that's kind of where I first got exposed to that. So it was really interesting to see kind of how they use that. But I feel like if it's a real hedge fund, they're going to use a Bloomberg terminal. However much it costs, isn't, at the end of the day, that's just going to be a tool for them. And because of that, they don't really see it as an expense, and instead they see it as an investment in the company.
Okay. So I saw that some of the larger hedge funds invest in alternative data sources. Some companies invest by data, satellite data of the parking lots to see whether more people are going to Walmart or Costco and so on. Is this something that happens even in smaller hedge funds, or they stick just to the Bloomberg Terminal?
Yeah, so this kind of again goes back to what the actual strategy of the hedge fund is. So for the hedge fund I was working for, I can't really say they were using, satellite images to see if people were going to Walmart's more. But at the end of the day, like I said, it all comes down to the strategy. So it kind of makes sense for the strategy I was just talking about for the hedge fund I worked for. They were interested in those distressed companies that were going through financial hard times. For them, it would make sense to kind of look at satellite images, see, like, let's say for, a movie theater stock, they would be like, oh, during the pandemic, obviously they weren't able to even be in business, but that wasn't really their fault. So it'd be interesting. But I think that's really interesting to think about all the kind of different ways that the hedge funds might go about doing this research. I'm sure there's so many ways that, we don't even know about that are so complex, but make perfect sense and are used by these hedge funds. But, I think at the end of the day, people are mostly probably just using, research on Bloomberg or the internet, not necessarily going through satellite images for the most part.
Okay. So you also had your experience at Regions Bank. Can you tell us a bit more what you did there and how was the environment like over there?
Yeah, so this last summer. So I just wrapped up my internship there 2 weeks ago. And that was an awesome experience. So I was actually in the Treasury group. So that's the group that manages all of the money of the bank. So for Regions Bank, it's one of the largest banks in the Southeast US. So that their cash balance was about 17 billion, assets were about 150 billion. So it was really interesting to see kind of how they manage that money. The specific team I was on was called the liquidity stress testing team. So what we were responsible for doing was kind of managing and monitoring the liquidity of all the cash. So that's at $17 billion worth that I just mentioned. So for this group, it was really interesting just because with the pandemic, we were definitely in unprecedented times with liquidity in banks. So a lot of people at the onset of the pandemic were really worried that people would be withdrawing all their money from their bank accounts because they'd be worried about COVID and pandemic. They wanted to get all their money out in cash and save it in their homes. But alternatively, the complete opposite happened. We saw stimulus checks here in the US, and that resulted in people saving their stimulus checks, and it ended up in people saving way more money than they were ever expecting. And honestly, no one was even withdrawing. Savings rates in the US have gone up so much. So it's really been an influx of cash into all these banks that really has never been seen before. So kind of finding what to do with all this cash was really important. And that was the team I was working on. So like I said, they were trying to find the balance between, still having enough money in cash just, for all the SEC and Federal Reserve requirements, just so that, if anyone ever needs money, they're able to withdraw it. But then also at the same time, the way banks make their money is through loans. So it's really important that they have enough just for the security purposes, but then also are able to loan out all their money because that's where the real money is made for the bank. So it's really an interesting time to be working on this group. But overall, I was in the Treasury, which manages kind of the entire balance sheet of the bank.
Okay. So it's very hard to find people that work in the Treasury department of a bank. So I think it's not very clear what are the different positions and different tasks that people have to do inside a Treasury team, let's say. So what are the operations you do day to day usually?
Yeah, so the Treasury group as a whole is extremely large. So like I said, it covers pretty much the entire balance sheet of a bank's statement. So if you think about it, it's not just cash, it's all their assets, liabilities. So like I just mentioned kind of what my specific group would do, but there's also an investment portfolio group in every single bank. And this group is really cool because, they take all this excess cash that the bank has and they actually invest it. So a lot of the banks, they're not necessarily allowed to invest in equities, but they are allowed to invest in bonds. So this is kind of one of those groups that I monitored pretty closely this summer. So they would really pay a lot of attention to the federal rates and all of that, and they would trade the bonds. And this is just another source of income for the bank. So all of these guys are super smart, they're CFAs. So that was just another really kind of cool group within the Treasury group. There are a lot more, super niche and complex groups. There's funds transfer pricing, which is, it focuses on the actual like benefit that each line of business provides to the business, which I didn't explain very well, but it's a very complex thing. You'd just be surprised how many niche groups there are within the Treasury. But as far as like day-to-day activities within the Treasury, it's a lot of analysis on the actual numbers of the balance sheet of whatever specific area of it that you're the one monitoring. So for myself, it was a lot of monitoring of all the liquidity. So, line draws, loans, things like that. And most of the reports, honestly, would just go to someone else within the Treasury. That was kind of probably one of the aspects I didn't like. It was very internally focused. And, when I'm looking at where I want to be full-time and I'm applying for roles now, I definitely want to be in a more client-facing, externally focused role. But the Treasury is a really fun group. It's not quite as, intensive and, cutthroat as maybe investment banking or corporate banking, things like that. But it definitely operates and serves a really important purpose for the bank. Because if it wasn't for that, the bank would lose its money and we would see 2008 all over again. And no one wants to see that.
Okay. So you told us about the intensity that it's not like investment bank. Can you go more in detail and tell us what it's like to work there? For example, working hours usually, what it's like, and is it a stressful job or not? You're not always on rush.
Right. No, that's a good question. So within Treasury, like I said, it's really not as intense. So, when you think investment banking, you've got a lot of deadlines. So you're delivering a product to the customer, there's usually a strict deadline. For the Treasury, there's still deadlines, but it's not like you're dealing with a customer or a client. You're just dealing with, someone else within the bank. So because of that, it kind of alleviates a little bit of the pressure. I mean, it's still definitely very stressful. It's kind of one of those areas where, depending on the time of the month, it can really ramp up. So for liquidity stress testing, it would be the beginning of the month is when all the reports were due. So you compile the month from, the previous month, and you have to all compile that into a single report, hit it out. You have specific tasks you would need to do for each specific business day. And then for a lot of other things, they would just have. So I think audit would also be within the Treasury. So of course, with them, it would be really important, come earning seasons that they get all of that. And so that can definitely be stressful. So it kind of comes in waves. But as far as the overall environment, Regions, like I said, is a Southern bank. So just kind of culturally, it's a lot different than the Northeast and New York. So that can really play a big role in a lot of that. I felt so supported throughout the entire internship. Everyone was so friendly to me. Even when I expressed to them I was, looking to go elsewhere for a full-time position, not necessarily in the Treasury. Everyone was super supportive of my decision, just wanted to help out. And I don't think the same could really be said for some other banks or some other areas. So I'm very grateful for my experience with Regions.
Okay. But is it common for people to go, for example, in the Treasury and then change into the commercial side or go into investment banking and other roles inside the firm? Or when you get in, you usually stay in the same field?
Yeah, so this is all personal preference, but I think for the most part, people probably stay, which just makes sense because if you work a certain position for a few years, most likely you start, being promoted, and then if you were to try to transition into another line of the business, you probably have to be more of an entry level. So you'd have kind of to weigh a lot of the pros and cons of salary and all of that. But I'd say probably for the most part, from my experience, most people who stay in Treasury stay in Treasury. So that's kind of why I wanted to make it clear to them that I was interested in lateraling over into the investment banking side of it, just because this was the time to do it before I started my full-time position. But it definitely has been done before. I mean, a lot of what you learn is still applicable to pretty much any area within the financial industry. I mean, there's a lot of technical analysis, Excel, Power BI, Bloomberg. So overall, you're still learning a lot of those skills that are applied everywhere. So you're still able to apply that information. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, people probably stick to that path and just keep going. But the same is probably said for a lot of different careers.
Okay. Just wondering, I don't know whether you have insights about this or not. How are salaries in a treasury field compared to, let's say, investment banking or asset management?
Yeah. So as far as salaries go, it isn't paid quite as much. With investment banking, a lot of the salary is made up through bonuses. And with Treasury, because you're not really working with clients, you're not generating as much revenue. So it's not as, volatile throughout the year as to as much, value that you're adding to the company. So you're not getting as high bonuses, and that's probably the bigger aspect of it. But you aren't making quite as much money as investment bankers. But like I said, your quality of life is probably better. I mean, you're not working the hours. So a lot of people would probably argue, you'd rather make a lower salary, but be able to go home at 5 or 6 o'clock at night every single day and, have a life outside of work. And a lot of people probably value that more so than the extra couple thousand, $10,000. As far as asset management, I know a lot of those positions, depending on the firm you're working for, can pay a lot right at the beginning, but for a lot, in maybe some of those entry level positions, you're not always making a lot from the beginning. So as far as their comparison to the Treasury, I'm sure it's somewhat even. I'm asset management, I'm sure is still a little bit higher just because, again, it is highly bonus based. But yeah, I mean, still you're getting paid extremely well. It's a finance field. So you're still living kind of that lifestyle and getting paid extremely well to do it. But no, it's not quite at the level of investment banking.
Okay. So another thing, I don't know whether you had the experience to see that firsthand, but for example, from people that I know in consulting, they say that consulting firms have some sort of metrics to understand the employee's performance. Is there something similar in banking? And if so, what are the things that are they looking for to understand your performance?
Yeah. So as far as my own experience, I can't say if they really had anything, in place where they could monitor all of that. But I do know it's a lot, especially having an internship, it's a lot based on what your manager reports. So I had 2 specific managers this internship, one who's actually on my team and one who was just a functional manager. So I think a lot of hiring decisions comes from, what your manager's reports are. So I hadn't heard of anything specific to the finance or banking industry when it comes to, employee performance. But I definitely think that's coming in the future. I mean, because things are so deadline based, it's really important that you hire someone who's able to get things done on time when they say they're going to do it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that implemented in the next couple of years.
Okay. So another thing that I was curious about. So what do you think are the skills that are most important in these kind of roles? Is it mastering Excel? Is it more Bloomberg, or is it something completely different?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. This is something I always ask in any networking any networking call I have with someone, senior to me. I think at the end of the day, within finance, everyone's going to have those technical skills. After a certain level, if you're applying for, a good internship or a good job, you should have a lot of Excel experience. You should be able to do a VLOOKUP, index, whatever. So I think it's more so things outside of those that can kind of, again, differentiate yourself and really allow you to thrive in the positions. So, like I said, the Excel should just be the baseline. Like that should just be expected. And I think outside of that, a lot of it is your social skills, your soft skills. For myself, it's been really important to be able to ask questions. I think a lot of the times interns probably, feel like they need to know it all. And if you ended up, acting like this in an internship and someone gives you an assignment and you're like, yep, I can do this, but deep down, you can't, that's just going to make you look bad in the long run when, you turn in something and it's completely wrong. Alternatively, it's a lot better to make it clear from the jump, like, hey, I don't know how to do this, but, can you teach me? And then also just be able to ask questions. So if there's something that you're unsure of, definitely just make it clear. And I think this just goes a long way because as interns, whoever it is, the analysts you're working under, they're going to be doing so much work for you. It's going to make their lives way easier if you're just clear to them from the offset. what you know, what you don't know. And again, they don't expect you to know everything. They expect you to be able to use Excel, but they don't expect you to be able to do everything perfectly on the first try. It's really important to just be as transparent with them as possible and have those soft skills. And again, like I said earlier, be able to have conversations. You don't want to just always be serious and not be able to have a conversation with someone. A common thing I hear in a lot of networking calls when they talk about what they're doing and how they decide if they want to hire a candidate is they ask, is this someone I would want to get a beer with? And I think that's really important, and kind of changes your perspective on things, outside of just work. Am I actually being a good person? Am I being, too uptight? Things like that. It's important to kind of see everything from a big picture and not just the technical skills am I delivering, like that. So definitely important to have those technical skills. I'd say it would be pretty hard to get the job without having them. But on top of that, definitely make sure you're you have a personable personality and you're able to have a conversation and, be transparent with whoever it is that you're working with.
Okay. So you talked about Excel as being the baseline. Were you tested on Excel before getting being selected for the internship, or is it something that you trained? Is it something that you train at university on a regular basis?
Yeah. So when I was applying for this internship, I wasn't tested on Excel. Like, there were technical questions in the interview, but they didn't require me to use Excel or anything like that. On my resume, I did put that I am certified in Excel. So like I was preaching, that's kind of just expected. So through the University of Florida, there's a class that they offer that allows you to get certified in Excel. So through that, that's kind of where I got my foundational understanding of Excel, and is where I got certified. But as far as how much that actually is applied to the internship, a lot of it is stuff you just have to learn as you go. I mean, you're using Excel nonstop every single day, but you're still constantly looking up shortcuts and things like that on Google. It's definitely just kind of a learning process. And of course, the Excel shortcuts are extremely useful. But again, they don't expect you to know everything going into it, but they expect you to be able to learn as you go and really be able to develop your skills as the summer progresses.
Okay. So can you tell us how the various interviews work? For example, in Regions, how many rounds did you have to go through? Is it 1, 2, 3, or more?
Yeah, so I applied for so many internships last year. It's hard to keep track of all the different interviews, but I think with Regions, we started out with a hire review interview, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they're usually just given to everyone. And then it's just a virtual interview where, the computer asks you a question, you're given 30 seconds to think of an answer, and then 2 minutes to respond, and then you can't change it. So these are definitely pretty tough. So I think that was probably the first round. And then after that, I think I had a phone call with someone who was currently in the program. That might have come before the hire review, but that was really informative. That was a really just easy conversation. It wasn't really tough or anything like that. More so just kind of a time for us to learn about each other, me to ask any questions. And then from there, I think from that point, there was still like a lot of networking calls that I had to go on. But then from there, I was able to go straight on to the super day. And then within the super day, I think I had like 5 interviews with different lengths throughout the day. But, super days are pretty tough. But, if you think about them from the same perspective, like I said before, everyone wants them to go well. Both sides of the conversation want the conversation to be a good one. It takes a lot of pressure off of it. But definitely kind of the entire application process can be pretty daunting, especially when you're applying for a lot of internships. But at the end of the day, once you do get that job offer, it makes it all worth it.
Okay. So I was just wondering, are there any that you talked about the technical questions? Are they sort of like the business cases, or they're just let's say theory stuff that you study on books that you have to remember?
Yeah, so with Regions, it was more so kind of conceptual. It wasn't like cases. I had other super days that were like that. Specifically with Citibank, we were given a case at the beginning of the day, And then later on, one of our 5 interviews was us presenting our decision, our case to someone. So that is still definitely an important skill to have and be able to analyze things through that perspective. But with Regions, and for the most part with a lot of other banks, it's going to be mostly conceptual. It'll ask you to, let's say, walk through all the different financial statements, the typical investment banking questions, explaining the DCF, what's free cash flow, things like that. If you can kind of just master those, I mean, realistically, just through your education, they should just come as second nature. But it's not like you're pulling out Excel and having to work through a model right there. It's mostly just going to be you talking and being able to walk through things, being able to convert them from what you have in your head into a conversation is what's most important.
Okay. So I'm done with the questions. I think you explained it very, very well. So thank you for that. If you have anything else that you would like to share with us, I'm ready to listen. If not, I really want to thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I do have something quick I'll just share.
Yeah.
I know I talk a lot about all the finance internships, and I made a video that's done pretty well, and I applied for over 150 internships this last year, and I definitely got rejected from more than I got accepted. So I think at the end of the day, it's really about kind of having that confidence in yourself and knowing that being able to kind of pick yourself up from those rejections and move on is really important. I mean, at the end of the day, what matters most is the one company that says yes. It's not the companies that say no. So it's really easy to kind of get discouraged after getting rejected from certain companies. But if you do all the things that I talked about in this call, having those extracurriculars outside of your school, doing the networking with people who are working for those companies, if you do all these things and you have a good GPA and you know how to use Excel and you're able to talk somewhat fluently, you should be in a good spot. And just trust in the process, keep on putting in the work. And even if you don't end up getting the internship of your dreams, that's not the end of the world. It's really important, especially as a student, just to get some experience. Whatever field it is, you always see people who lateral from a career that has nothing to do with the career that they're in now, and then they're still so extremely successful. So it's really important to just kind of have that long-term mindset. I know it can seem like it's the end of the world if you're not doing exactly what you want to be doing right now. But again, having that long-term outlook on life and on your journey, and just making the most of everything and meeting as many people as possible, connecting with as many people, and having those strong relationships, because you never know when you're going to need them in the future. It's definitely just going to make the whole process so much better. And I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you today. I mean, this is just crazy. I'm talking to someone across the entire world, and that's through YouTube. It's just unbelievable kind of what networking can do. So I think you're doing an awesome job with this YouTube channel, connecting with so many different people within finance. So I'm really excited to see how this channel grows and how you are able to grow in your career. But again, I thank you so much for having me here today. I'm thankful for the experience, and yeah, that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Before I let you go, I was just wondering, last thing, did you improve more with the one-to-one guiding from the portfolio manager from Wharton, or did you learn more in a structured environment such as Regions?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think I definitely learned so much from both, and there's probably different kinds of learning. So, after my sophomore year when I was working for the hedge fund, a lot of that was kind of the conceptual aspect of finance. So that was kind of just me understanding how hedge funds work and how the asset management industry kind of operates, because before that I didn't have a ton of information about it. So that kind of opened my eyes to a lot of that. And then of course he was talking a lot of strategy with me, so that was just all new. So I learned so much. And again, like I said, I was being able to pick his brain. I was able to ask as many questions as possible. So I learned so much from that. But then also with Regions, I learned extremely technical things that, with the hedge fund, I got a big overview of things. And with Regions, it was very niche and specific. And so I think I can't really say I learned more in either one. But, like I said before, it's really just about making the most of the experiences that you're given in the moment. So it's like in both those experiences, I just try to absorb as much information as possible, be a sponge. And, I learned so much from both of those. And no matter what it is, I know I'm going to apply it into my future career. So again, just having that open mindset and being able to just absorb that information, no matter what the information is, will really go a long way. So learned a ton from both. Can't really say I learned more from either, but it's all good.
Okay. So thank you a lot for your time. Make sure to subscribe to his channel. I'll put, of course, the link in the description. Thank you for being with us. I'm Giacomo. This is Hustle Hub. See you next time.
See ya. Bye.